So you're ready to buy your first bike, but the problem is every Ninja 400 and R3 is sold out in your area. And you're not going to miss out on the peak of the 2023 riding season, are you? Never fear. Believe it or not, there are a lot of great beginner bikes available that are not just your standard sport bikes or an SV650. A lot of bikes get tons of well-deserved praise as the pinnacle of beginner riding, but that doesn't mean it's the be-all, end-all. There are lots of slept-on bikes available used or even brand new that will happily keep a rider entertained for their first few riding seasons. So without further ado, let's talk about some of the most overlooked beginner motorcycle. Today's video is sponsored by Chin Mounts. I will tell you more about them later on in the show. Let's get into it. The first bike on the list today is the Yamaha XT250. Of all the dual sport motorcycles available today, the XT250 is definitely not highest on the list in terms of praise or acclaim. Hell, even the TW200 is more commonly mentioned than the XT250, but there is something about those silly tractor tires that just makes dual sport dorks swoon with envy. But the XT250 is worthy of attention as well, especially for beginner riders, because you gotta remember, as a beginner rider, you'll likely have little to no point of reference for what a great motorcycle is. So if you can ignore the spec sheet gremlins that infest your prefrontal cortex after hours of scouring motorcycle forums under the cover of nightfall, you should be able to appreciate just about any motorcycle for what it is, as long as what the motorcycle is not a boom Venom Motorsports 250cc Chinese superbike. At least for the first season of riding or so, you should be pretty excited to be able to ride anything while your other MSF graduates patiently await the CRF 300L they ordered 6 months ago to finally arrive at the dealership. Anyway, why is the XT250 worthy of your attention as a beginner rider? First of all, they are cheap as all get out. Brand new models are being sold at dealerships for less than $5,000, and used models can be bought for just a couple thousand. The current generation has been made since 2008, so the huge production windows makes these bikes pretty easy to come by. They're also completely bulletproof. They have an air-cooled 249cc engine that makes 19 horsepower and 14 foot-pounds of torque. Coolant? Radiator? Never has the XT250 uttered these words. It's a dual sport in its purest form. Super low maintenance engine, 11 inches of ground clearance, and 9 inches of suspension travel with an electric starter and fuel injection. That's all you really need. You accidentally drop it, who cares? When faced with the abuse, the XT250 will say, "Harder, daddy." Unlike other beginner bikes that you will outgrow as your purse faster and more advanced motorcycles, a bulletproof dual sport will really always have a place in your stable. Bad weather? Ride the XT. Dirt roads? Ride the XT. Is there the potential you will encounter a tear in the space-time continuum where you'll be teleported 1,000 years in the future and have to navigate the arid terrain weathered by nuclear warfare and climate disaster? You guessed it, ride the XT. Another motorcycle that's overlooked by the most categorical cross shoppers is the Honda Shadow. And as a quick side note, I wanted to tell you a story about the Honda Shadow. I remember one time my dad drove me to a Blockbuster. I must have been like 9 or 8 years old, and we were sitting there in the parking lot. He was just dropping off a movie or whatever, and a guy pulled up on a black cruiser motorcycle, and it was a Honda Shadow because I saw it said Shadow on the side of the bike, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So I kind of have a weird soft spot for Honda Shadows because it was one of the first bikes I remember actually seeing the name of. Anyway, let's get back into it. The Honda Shadow is one of those motorcycles that's been produced for forever. It's still in production by Honda in 2 different variants and has used models consistently available on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, but still somehow manages to evade the praise of the most devout motorcycle evangelists. Fast boys wouldn't give a Shadow the time of day because, well, it's a lumpy V-twin cruiser. And real deal cruiser patriots pay it no mind because, well, it's a Honda. But the Shadow is a really good bike for a beginner who wants a cruiser but doesn't want to pay the extra $5,000 for the barn shield branding. The only thing working against the Shadow as a beginner rider is the price and the weight. Costing nearly $8,000 brand new, it can sometimes be hard to justify a Honda Shadow compared to a more modern cruiser like the Rebel 500, which makes similar power but is way more modern and weighs like 100 pounds less. But this can be easily disregarded by the sheer amount of used Honda Shadows you can find for close to $5,000 or less. As for managing the weight, there are plenty of Midwestern women who are 5 feet tall and start on a 600-pound Sportster 883, so why not just stop making excuses? Come on. The Honda models use a 745cc V-twin making about 45 horse and 46 foot-pounds of torque. Honda currently sells the Shadow Aero, which is a more classic-looking cruiser, kind of boomer spec, to put it bluntly, as well as the Shadow Phantom, which is more edgy and blacked out. But previous models you may find are the Shadow RS and the Shadow Spirit. The Honda Shadow is a good bike, they're reliable and have a huge production window, and to the layperson with a mildly compromised vision, it kind of looks like a Harley-Davidson Sportster. So if that's your thing, it's definitely a bike you should be looking at. And if you're a beginner rider looking to get kitted out in all the essential riding gear, you don't want to overlook a camera mounting system designed specifically for your helmet. Thanks to Chin Mounts, who has sponsored today's video, you don't have to compromise your action camera with a crappy universal mount. Helmet cameras are becoming increasingly popular these days, not just for moto vloggers and content creators, but all kinds of riders. Just like a dash cam in your car, a helmet cam can come absolutely clutch in the case of an accident or incident on the road. With a helmet-mounted camera, you can now have cold hard proof. In a less serious context, having camera mounted on your helmet allows you to document some of your favorite scenic rides or give you an opportunity to capture some of the high-speed thrills you can use to flex with your buddies. And if you're a creator who likes to share your riding videos on social platforms, Chin Mounts allows you to mount your camera vertically, so your shots will fit perfectly in the vertical aspect ratio you find on TikTok or Instagram. Chin Mounts makes it easier than ever to safely and easily connect an action camera to your helmet. They have over 300 model-specific mounts, which means you'll no longer have to fiddle with generic mounting hardware or epoxy or something like that. And because you're a loyal Yami Noob viewer, you can go to chinmounts.com/Yami and use the code Yami for 10% off of your order. Again, that is Yami for 10% off of your entire order. Thanks to Chin Mounts for supporting the channel, and now back to the video. I think an important lesson I want to impart on all of you baby squids who are shopping around for your first bike is don't let the MSRP for a brand new model deter you. Buying brand new from the dealership, especially in present day where dealerships can get away with charging above MSRP for motorcycles and cars, is of course the most expensive way to buy a motorcycle. On top of the ticket price, you'll have to contend with dealer fees and dedicate a few hours to haggling over warranty and financing options, but these added costs make many motorcycles prohibitive for new riders. Because for most beginners, you probably shouldn't buy a bike with a $10,000 price tag before all the fees and interest and insurance costs are factored in. So with all that being said, the next motorcycle on the list today fits into a category of motorcycle you probably shouldn't buy, but should jump on if you're looking to get a good deal on a used one. The motorcycle in question is the Kawasaki W800. The W800 is Kawasaki's neo-retro cafe racer, offering akin to a both classic UJM and a British roadster a la the Triumph Bonneville. The W800 is a 773cc air-cooled parallel twin engine, which Kawasaki interestingly refers to as a vertical twin. It's like saying, yeah, my bike has a V-twin, a vertical twin, that is. It's just weird. This engine's making 51 horse and 46 foot-pounds of torque, which should be plenty manageable for a new rider. This bike is very much a styling exercise, as much of its acclaim is in regards to its aesthetic choices and less of its performance. It's actually kind of an authentic vintagey bike. Seriously, go look at this thing in person. Although 46 foot-pounds of torque below 5,000 RPM gives this bike plenty of get up and go around town. The MSRP for the W800 sits just above 9,000, which is a pretty big pill to swallow when you can get a Bonneville T100 for just $1,000 more. But the W800 becomes a sleeper hit when you realize you can find models for only a few years old for a few thousand miles, closer to $6,000. And for that price, this motorcycle makes a lot more sense for a new rider who wants a modern bike with retro styling and Japanese reliability. If you've spent any time in the throes of the Yami Noob universe, you've likely heard that I have a thing or two against the Honda CBR 500R. The short version is, it's heavier and more expensive than a Ninja 400 that makes comparable power. But what if you want a beginner-friendly naked bike? Honda's CB500F, the naked bike in Honda's middleweight beginner class, a category solely occupied by Honda's 500cc's nowadays, makes a bit of a better case for itself than the CBR. Do these bikes need to exist as a gateway between 300 class bikes and 650 class bikes? Probably not, but they do anyways. Which just means extra options for riders to cross-shop. The CB500F is lighter than the engorged pig that is the CBR, coming in at 416 pounds. By all comparisons, 416 pounds is still a pretty light motorcycle, but it's about 40 pounds heavier than some of the competition, and you'll feel that difference. But with that added weight is an increase in power. The CB500F makes around 50 horse and 31 foot-pounds of torque. If you compare this bike to other beginner nakeds like the MT-03 and Z400, you'll find that bump in both weight and power doesn't lead to any substantial gains in the riding experience. But all things considered, that doesn't make it objectively worse than other entry-level naked bikes until you start to consider the extra cost to purchase. But similarly to the W800 mentioned previously, a good deal on a CB500F can make a really solid choice for a beginner rider. Used CBs that are only a few years old seem to be selling for around $5,000, which makes it only slightly more expensive than an MT-03 or a Z400. And for the right rider in the right circumstance, it may be a worthwhile purchase. Being a bit of a beefier motorcycle too, a bigger rider may feel more comfortable on a CB500F versus some of the competition. Separate of superfluously scrupulous spec sheet scrutiny, the CB500F would make a good first bike for the right rider who exists in a specific time and place, who has to make do with what motorcycles are available in their immediate vicinity. The next motorcycle on the list is the KTM Duke 390 Adventure. This bike doesn't really need any justification whatsoever. We all know KTM is really good at making value-driven beginner motorcycles, but next to the normal Duke and the RC390, I feel like the ADV model is a little slept on. Let me explain. Few motorcycles are as capable for such an affordable price as the 390 Adventure. Adventure bikes used to be reserved for dads who are attempting to recapture their youth but have yet to evolve to the Z06 Corvette life, but now adventure bikes are attracting all sorts of riders, beginners included, and few bikes are able to offer the capability and creature comforts that a more expensive ADV bike can. At the price point that a beginner can handle, the 390 Adventure has a 373cc liquid-cooled single that makes 44 horse and 27 foot-pounds of torgos. Like other KTM 390 models, the 390 ADV also has higher-end features like adjustable WP Apex suspension and a TFT display. Now, what separates the Adventure apart is the spoked wheels and semi-knobby tires, an off-road riding mode that allows for a degree of wheel slip for navigating gravel and mud. Like I said at the top of this section, the KTM Duke 390 doesn't need any hard selling. I just think it doesn't get as much recognition as one of the best entry-level ADVs that you can get. I think every Versys motorcycle from Kawasaki is likely overlooked in this relative class, but I get it. They're kind of that dorky brand of sport touring bike that kind of looks like an adventure bike but can also not go off-road. But hey, some people like comfort and convenience more than power, aesthetics, or character, and who am I to judge? Also, if you're a beginner rider who just wants a motorcycle that is comfortable to ride for commuting and won't get stolen or even really looked at in public, look no further than the Versys 300. This bike makes like 40 horsepower and 20 foot-pounds of torque, and that's about it. It's a motorcycle. It's cheap, it's ergonomically designed, it has a windscreen, and has the same appeal as those ugly Keen sandals people wear to the farmers markets to buy raw milk. And if you're a bit older and more responsible, you can probably do alright on a Versys 650, which will get you a little bit more power and more creature comforts. The Versys 650 will cost closer to $9,000 compared to the $5,900 for the Versys 300, but you know, for the right person in the right place, either bike could be a good buy depending on your maturity, confidence, and cash flow. And the last overlooked beginner motorcycle today is the Suzuki TU250X. The TU250 is a lovable little retro roadster that was produced for over 20 years. You may have even ridden one in your MSF course, where they can usually be seen alongside T-Dubs and Rebel 250s. This bike uses a tried and true air-cooled 249cc single-cylinder engine. Chinese bikes commonly use clones of older air-cooled engines from Honda and Suzuki, and the engine in the TU250 is likely one that's commonly imitated. This bike is just super easy going, making 16 horsepower and 12 foot-pounds of torque. It weighs just 330 pounds, and with that power-to-weight ratio and the classic British roadster looks, the TU250X rivals some of the smaller motorcycles from Royal Enfield. Sale of the TU250X ended in the US in 2019, but these bikes are pretty easy to come by. Depending on the age, they can range from $2,000 to $4,000. They're super simple, reliable, and even fuel injected. And just as a random anecdote, this bike has a claimed 82 miles per gallon, which is nuts if it gets anything close to that. Either way, if you just want an inexpensive no-frills bike to get from point A to point B in an urban area, the TU250X has your back. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Did you start on an oddball beginner bike, or did you follow in the steps of Papa Yam and get an R3? There are so many motorcycles out there, just get out one and ride. If you're a beginner who's in need of all sorts of juicy motorcycle content, be sure to subscribe so you can get as much great information as possible. Thanks again to Chin Mounts for the support, and I'll catch you later. Fact: the word avocado actually comes from an Aztec word, ayucatl, which means testicle. The name was given to the fruit due to its shape and the belief that avocados had aphrodisiac properties. Anyone else getting hungry? Goodbye. Well, look at you. You've made it to the end of another Yammy Noob video. You should consider yourself pretty lucky because I have curated this one right over here for you to continue watching. It's probably just as good as the one you just saw. Unless you hated the one you just saw. I don't know, maybe leave me a comment down below about how much you hated it as well too. Or just keep watching this one. Make sure you keep watching Yammy Noob. Don't forget to keep watching Yammy Noob. That's the most important thing. Keep watching Yammy Noob.